it's really important to remember that security is not the same as peace building. And peace is not simply the absence of war. Peace is something that takes work, it takes imagination, and it takes often a tremendous effort from communities to own and hold the histories that are different, but be able to move forward in a dialogue of what it means to shape a future together. And one place we have seen that is in Northern Ireland and in the Northern Ireland peace process. I'm really delighted now to be able to introduce Stephen Heron, a cultural anthropologist who works in community relations and who's going to talk to us about his work with Smashing Times and with communities across Northern Ireland in terms of the role the arts can play in building connections, especially at a time when Brexit seems to be on the horizon, and that work of community development, of collective imagination, and crucially, of shared principles of human rights is going to be even more important than ever. The women's movement played a crucial role, of course, in shaping the Northern Ireland peace process. And again, women's participation will be crucial in the challenges ahead. So I'm going to ask you, Stephen, to talk a little bit about your work and about the exhibition that you are holding as part of the EU 79.
I'm delighted to have been part of the EU 79 project. It has been both inspirational and humbling to see the work so many women have done in transforming politics across Europe. Their stories have been fascinating and they showcase the important role women play in contemporary politics. Not only that, the stories and experiences from these inspirational group of women have shown their role has extended far beyond the politics of the European Parliament. It extends across society, across cultures and across borders. And that's been one of the most important things in relation to the EU, has been its role in overcoming borders, not just politically, but socially, culturally and economically. And hopefully that will continue in the years ahead. Brexit has somewhat dominated the headlines recently and has caused some debate with regards to the EU and its future. But it should not dilute from the fact that the EU has played and will continue to play an important role in transforming people's lives and building bridges, as these women from 1979 showed. Hopefully, as we move further into the future, the EU will continue in that role and will encourage others to join in the EU project.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for highlighting those stories and for your contribution to the EU 79 exhibition. Our next guest is going to be Hina Khan. Hina Khan is an artist. She's one of the contributors to the EU 1979 exhibition. And she's going to talk to us about her artistic work, her artistic process, and how it relates to the question of gender equality across borders and human rights as a common concern right across Europe and indeed the wider world.
As an artist, I always looking towards the socio-political issues, and what is happening around me, I always look towards that things and I pick up that topics into my paintings. While I have done my thesis, and my thesis painting was all about the socially accepted and non-accepted women, and I have created a massive miniature painting piece for my thesis, and I have participated in Pakistan's several group shows. I'm living in Ireland since 2015, and I am working with different people. I work with the Mayo artist, I work with the Dublin artist, Laois artist, and I participated in different art galleries. I produced some solo show and working in collaboration with different artists and filmmaker, and highly inspired by Anselm Kiefer and Michelangelo. I really like his work. Currently, Pakistani artist Imran Qureshi, Shazia Sikandar, they highly inspired me. And in my paintings, I'm really highlighting the issues which affect me as a human being, as an artist.
Thank you, Hina, for that wonderful contribution and for sharing the thought and process that goes into the creation of your artwork. And I really would encourage everybody to make sure they look to the Digital Arts exhibition, where you can see the work of Hina and many other artists from right across Europe who are contributing their vision in terms of EU 79. We now have a chance to move from art to that other creative work, which is politics and the creation of political change. And we have a chance to hear from historian and academic Sinead McCool, who's going to talk about two of the women who were elected in that seminal 1979 European Parliament election. Sinead de Valera for Fianna Fáil and Eileen Desmond for the Irish Labour Party. Both women who went on to continue to make a very important political contribution internationally and indeed nationally in Ireland. So I'm going to hand you over now to Sinead, and perhaps, Sinead, you might talk a little bit about political participation, that where the 1979 elections fit in that journey from women's suffrage at the beginning of the century and indeed to the moment now when we still are struggling to have women's equal participation in politics right across Europe.
This exhibition was started in 2018 to commemorate the election of the first woman TD, who of course was also an MP. Constance de Markievicz, as she was known at the time. We know her better, I think, as Madame Markievicz, which is what she used when she became political. This is an exhibition that was set up by the Commemorations Unit. And what was important for the official commemoration was to look at 100 years of women involved in politics and public life. During the period 100 years ago, when women were elected for the first time, it was a very slow movement into women taking up the role, even up to the present. Over that 100 years, we still have only 23 women who've made it to the cabinet table, to the centre of political discussion, the highest point of political leadership that you can attain. So as we go through this exhibition and we come to the point of the 1970s, which is our area of interest, there are only 4 women in Dáil Éireann. The numbers are low. In fact, they're lower at that particular moment than they were in the 1920s. When Ireland enters into the European Economic Community, as it was, on the 1st of January 1973, you have a really difficult situation politically in Ireland. And we know that there were a lot of issues around women and women's rights in the 1970s. It's only in 1973 that the Employment and Married Women's Act removes the ban on married women in civil service, also in local authority and health boards. When we're joining the European community, there's a lot of issues that have to be resolved. And one of the first things that happens is that we have a change in relation to equal pay for equal work. It was as a result of the Treaty of Rome. And so this helped Irish women to propel forward the types of changes that they needed in Irish society. And this at the time coincides with this period for women's liberation. And you'll see here that there are books related to women's liberation. Some of them had been banned previously and were now brought into the country or be made available. And so these are influencing women, political women, such as Nuala Fennell, whose collection of books these are, and other women like Monica Barnes. Both of those women stood for election in the 1979 election. And these women who didn't get elected, Monica Barnes and Nuala Fennell, the women were really impressive candidates. Nuala Fennell, for example, had set up the founder member of an organisation called AIM. It stood for Action, Information and Motivation. And she was one of the first women to set up a refuge for battered wives, as they were known then. She was executive member in the Irish Council for the Status of Women. In 1977, she stood for Dáil Éireann as an independent candidate, wasn't elected again, and was eventually elected, and really, played a major role in Ireland in the 1980s. And then we have also Monica Barnes, who had been involved in the Employment Equality Agency from 1977 on, that was implementing equality legislation. She stood for the Leinster constituency for the Fine Gael party. She had been chairperson of Women Elect, an organisation that was for women serving in the Dáil, Seanad and local authorities. When we think about the two women who are elected, well, one of them was a veteran of this period of history. She had been first elected in the 1960s. Like so many other Irish women, she was elected because she was widowed. Her husband, Dan Desmond, a Labour TD who represented Cork, died from tuberculosis. Eileen herself also had tuberculosis, but she survived and went on to take his seat. Her daughter, Paula Desmond, has described going to political meetings with her mother and then her mother putting her to bed and working until 1 and 2 in the morning, handwriting letters, petitioning for her constituents, a very, very hard-working woman. And she was elected to the European Parliament. When she was elected, she received 53,614 votes. She relished this time as an MP because for the first time in her life, she was part of a large and powerful left. She had previously served as the chairperson of the Women's Representative Council. When she returned to be in Dáil Éireann and went on to become a TD, the highest ranking TD, in that she was Minister for Social Welfare. The item that you see here, this dress, was an item that she wore when she was a minister. It's 1980s. It's by Irish designer Ibby Organson. It's made of tweed. You've got the sort of the browns and the orange and the rustic colours. But when you look at it and you sort of take away the haute couture blouse, it's a shawl and a long skirt. And I love that about Eileen Desmond, their selection of what is really an Irish traditional outfit, purchased for the medical dinner, which was held, I think, in the College of Surgeons at the time. But when she went to this function, she stayed true to her roots. She was somebody who was brought up in a council cottage. Her father, who was a postman and a small farmer, lost his sight when she was 11, and so the family did struggle in those years, but she was still encouraged into her life, first in her education, and later she had the presence to be able to become involved in politics. The other woman that was elected during this landmark election was Sheila de Valera, who was 25 years old when she was elected. She had been elected in 1977 and was the youngest TD in Dáil Éireann. She'd been elected for Dublin Mid constituency, and she was really well known in Ireland because, of course, she was the granddaughter of Eamon de Valera, who had founded the Fianna Fáil party that she was a member of. He had been Taoiseach, the Prime Minister in Ireland. He goes on to be central to the history of the foundation of the Irish state. She is carrying that name, and obviously that would have helped in terms of her election. But her grandfather cast a long shadow. So when she went to Europe, it would have been very freeing from her to be away from this constant association with her grandfather. And I'm sure she relished the time in Europe. She was a member of the European Progressive Democrats, and while she was there, she was involved in issues like social affairs and employment. She was involved in a very important committee into the inquiry into the situation of women in Europe. Like Eileen Desmond, she came back to Ireland then and later served as a TD and a minister, and her period in Europe was hugely influential in how she went forward. By moving out into Europe, by going outside of Ireland and looking into the wider world, it was hugely influential, not just for her personally, but for her influence on other women and on Irish people in general.
Thank you, Sinead. It's wonderful to hear the stories of different women in politics in Ireland and indeed across the European Union placed alongside each other, and indeed to hear about the importance of the European Union in terms of women's equality in Ireland and the building of democratic participation in the broader sense. Of course, as well as the 2 women from Ireland who we've already discussed, there were 5 women elected from the Netherlands to that first European Parliament in 1979. And many years later, there is still extraordinary work happening to ensure a real diversity of women's participation in all aspects of politics and community decision-making in the Netherlands. One project that has been doing incredible work is the Donna Daria project. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Gert-Jan Verboom from the Donna Daria project in the Netherlands, partners with Smashing Times in this EU 1979 project.
Hi, my name is Gert-Jan Verboom. I work at the Center of Emancipation and Social Inclusion in Rotterdam called Donna Daria. Today I will talk to you about activism through art. What I consider activism through art is any type of activist or emancipation message that you bring across through creative creative expressions. Art has always been a means to let people think, to let people interpret, let people come up with new ideas and new insights. So throughout history, art has been used to convey messages. So what do I consider activism through art? Basically, any message of inclusion that you want to convey, like through creative processes or creative tools. So art has always been, like in history, art has always been a way to convey messages that people think, interpret it in their own way, and bring across messages of inclusion or what the artist wanted to tell to the people. For me, art through activism can also be big, bold statements in the public space, like this monument behind me. Behind me, you see the monument that was made for the acceptance of people with other sexual orientations and other gender identities. What me and the other initiative holders and the artists behind it wanted to convey, that everyone should feel represented in this monument, and that is a really tough job. So what we decided to do is take the colors of the rainbow flag and present them in a not like ordinary way, but also include the colors of the transgender flag and the brown and black colors, because with these mixture of colors we wanted to represent the marginalized communities within the LGBTQ community as well, meaning people of color and trans people. So putting those colors in there and mixing it, for me, is already like activism through art. It is an activist message within a monument, and I think it's a really good way to make a bold statement in a public space like this. So activism through art is also a really good way to explore the minorities within minorities. Like, for instance, the LGBTQ movement or the anti-racism movement are like mini societies in a bigger one. So all the problems that we face in the big society are also present in the smaller societies. So art can also be used as a magnifying glass to kind of like see what is unseen, because once you see things, you can't like ignore them anymore. I think that smaller communities like emancipation movements, activist movements, also move within the bigger society. So racism, Islamophobia, hate against women, and hate against trans people and people that are gay can be found in any of the different movements. So I think that art can be also a magnifying glass to address the bigger issues. So, as I told you before, I work at Donna Daria, the Center of Emancipation, and Donna Daria was founded out of a lot of different women's organizations with many cultural backgrounds. So when we went up to the attic and look at our archives, because we want to make an exhibition about fierce Rotterdam women, we found a lot of like artsy, like material there. So we found pictures, we found paintings, we found photographs, we found books with marching songs. We found a lot of activism through art right there on our attic. So at Donna Daria we march for many different reasons. We march against violence towards women, we march for Black Lives Matter, for LGBT rights, and we also march for the betterment of the position of refugees. What I notice at these demonstrations and marches, that the signs that are used are almost works of art. You know, it's almost like it's art that was made for activism. And that is why I get inspired and I love going through to marches like that. So when you make signs that are pieces of art, not only the people around you at the demonstration will notice, but the media will notice you as well. You will get likes, you will get shares, you will be like on social media a lot. And you get noticed, but who also notices you are the politicians. Who also notices you are the people that make the laws that can change the situation that you're demonstrating for. So to my younger generation, I would say, use your social media, use your art skills, get out there and march, because it really is art through activism, activism through art. So I want to close off with the little piece of art that is behind me. What I like about my city, Rotterdam, is that we have these murals and these paintings throughout the city, and they all have like this message that connects to us. So behind me you see the painting that was made by a refugee. The horse kind of like carries the world on its back, and it's about cultural differences. What I would suggest is that you go out, take pictures, share stories of art and their meaning, and give your own interpretation to the art. Share it, use it for your activism, and maybe I will see you online.
Thank you, Gert Van. And it's wonderful to hear from another of the partners working with Smashing Times on the U79 project. This brings us to the end of the panel discussion. But I invite you now to look at the Digital 1979 exhibition and indeed look at the 67 other stories of women who were elected to that first seminal 1979 EU Parliament. If you visit www.smashingtimes.ie, you can see the artworks and the stories placed alongside each other, reflecting on the incredible moment of those women who helped found the European Parliament so many years ago, and indeed looking towards the future and the role that Europe must play in shaping gender equality, democracy and peace into the future.
The first question is, what's your name, where are you from, and what you do?
All right. My name is Kim van Sparrentak. I'm from the Netherlands. I grew up in the southwest, in Middelburg, and currently I live in Rotterdam. And I'm a member of the European Parliament.
In the second question, we want to know about you in general. So tell us about your work as MEP, what you do as MEP, and what's your experience in the democratic process.
So I've been a member of the European Parliament for a bit more than half a year now, and I work on the internal market and consumer protection, and I work on employment and social affairs. And some of the things I focus on there are really trying to create a more social Europe and a more equal Europe. And that's why I also work a lot on LGBT rights, women's rights, gender equality and disability rights.
And who are the key role models that inspire you in the European Union?
I think there are many young women now that are making a lot of waves within the European Parliament. One is my colleague Terry Reintke. She was already elected 5 years ago, and I already knew her from before, but the way she has made sure that, you know, women are being heard within the space of the Parliament, that's just amazing. I think that when you're a young woman like me, being heard, being listened to by people is already not something you're very used to, which is something that I think inspires me a lot and gives me a lot of energy to continue my work. When I'm standing in that plenary, people have to listen to me. And I think I realized I could have that power by looking at people like her, who actually said, okay, you know, people are not listening to people like us. We have now a Me Too movement. I'm going to stand there, I'm going to tell my story and you know, just show what we can do to make people's voices heard that are not being heard that often in society.
Can you comment on why the European Union was founded with reference to having its roots in World War II and the Holocaust, and what roles does the European Union play today to promote democracy, equality and peace for all?
Yeah, so of course the European Union was founded really based on a sort of capitalist idea that if we would have an internal market and we would have a lot of trade amongst countries, then we wouldn't fight each other anymore because we would be too economically dependent. But that evolved a lot into a bigger project. In the basic treaties of the European Union, we strive for gender equality, we strive for equality for all, rights for everyone, freedom for everyone to do whatever they want to do, and to make sure that they can actually thrive in society. And I think that evolution has been really crucial, and I think one of the pivotal moments was there also when the European Parliament was really elected. You know, we're going to make it a more democratic place, people will be represented. And still now you see that we are working a lot on democracy, but also on gender equality. There's a lot of discussions about gender equality. It's really high on the agenda now of the European Commissions. And we're really working on it now to make sure that gender mainstreaming is everywhere within all the work we're doing. And I think just because, you know, we evolved from something that we didn't want to have the horrible things that happened in the Second World War, we didn't have the big inequalities, and we didn't want to have war anymore. You still feel that foundation in the parliamentary work you do. And also when we're talking with other countries, you know, outside of the European Union, when we create trade agreements, you know, one of the main foundations is, okay, we will trade with you, but only if you do it on our terms. You know, we're not gonna trade with you if you don't take care of your people in a right way. So I think that's something very beautiful, and that's how we continue trying to make the world a more equal place.
Can you comment on the 1979 first European Parliament elections with reference to the 67 women that MEPs elected?
I don't really remember because that was 10 years before I was born. So yeah, 1979 for me, it's history, like really long time ago. But what I do find very fascinating and interesting also when you walk around now in the buildings, the women that got elected then, they made such a big mark that many of the buildings now are named after them. So we have the Louise Weiss building, of course. She was the first president because she was the oldest member to be elected. And Simone Veil, she's a very big part of the European Parliament in Strasbourg, is named after her. And it's the place where people actually can visit, you know, people from outside can visit the European Parliament. And I think it's pretty interesting to see that, you know, like if you look from a Dutch perspective, in the Netherlands, you know, we never had a female prime minister. We're really not great at gender equality in politics at all. But there, the first president of the European Parliament was a woman. And it was not just, you know, a very conservative woman who would fit into the image of an average male politician, but she was actually a woman who dressed quite feminine and who actually fought to make abortion legal in France. So, you know, she was a real feminist, and she became the president. I think that's really cool. But then if you walk through the parliament, you see all the images of all the presidents. You know, you had her, and then it's white old dude, white old dude, white old dude, white old dude, white old dude. So, you know, it was a good start, but we didn't manage to keep it up in the way what might have been nice, I think.
What role does the European Union play today to promote equal representation of women in political life at national and EU level?
All right. So what I think that the European Union does, they're working on several things. One of the things is really the fundamental rights, the way that we try to make sure that we have gender equality and that women's rights are you know, well taken care of within the European Union. And secondly, one of the things that the European Union is working on, and especially in this mandate, there's a lot of talk about how we're going to make sure that there will be gender equality on the workforce. So one of the things that will be launched is a gender pay gap action plan to make sure that the pension gap
pension gap.
To make sure, okay. Shall I continue or shall I start over?
We start with pension gap, I think.
Yeah. Make sure that the pension gap and the gender pay gap will be solved. And in general, working on gender equality. And next to that, I think that you see that there's a lot of women represented in the European Parliament, at least if you compare it to the Dutch situation. In the Netherlands, only a third of the people in the national parliament are female. And in the European Parliament, that percentage is quite a lot higher. also more diverse in general. There are more people of color. One of my colleagues and also the chair of the committee that I work in, Petra de Sutter, who is a great example. She's a transgender woman. She became the first trans chair of a committee. So there's more diversity, and I think that the fact that there's the possibility that there are more younger people because we have representation in such a way that many young people can actually get elected in the European Parliament. My youngest colleague, she's 21. And she's there, and we can inspire people by showing that we're there. And I think the fact that we're working not from a sort of national incentive, but from a incentive based on values, especially within the Green Group, that gives a whole different perspective on politics. We work on the same values no matter where we're from, so that empowers a lot of people to work together.
How can we make the European Union more accessible and relevant to citizens at a grassroots level, including young people? And what can citizens do to get involved with the European Union?
I think we can be more accessible by actually going more often to talk with people, and especially grassroots movements. When you're a member of the European Parliament, you have a lot of opportunities to support grassroots movements. And not only by saying, oh, I spoke to this one activist and he told me an amazing story and it was great and now I'm telling their story to make some political statement. Actually, what we can do is we can go out and be observers. We can make sure that if there is an action in coal mines, then we can go there. It's something I already did myself. We can go there and make sure that we observe whether the police and the activists are behaving well. The same goes with LGBT rights. We can go to prides when there's a pride in a country where it's very dangerous. We can be there as observers. And this gives an incentive to the police to say, okay, we have to be more careful. Those are just some activists, but here is someone important, which still feels a bit weird to me to be someone important. But here's a member of the European Parliament, and if we mess up, then we have a big problem. So this power that we have, I think, is something that we should use more often. And next to that, I think that to make sure that we are more accessible is to also invite people more often. We as MEPs have the possibility to invite people and actually sponsor them to come to the European Parliament. And I don't think we're using this often enough to give this opportunity to people who really need it. At the moment, you usually see school groups that come, and of course, I think it's very important that we also educate young people, but I think we can also give the opportunities to the smaller grassroots movements who have the opportunity to come together and meet each other. So, for example, inviting LGBT groups from countries from all over the European Union and make sure they get together at the same day and actually have the opportunity to discuss with each other and discuss with politicians and empowering them in that way. And this is something I'm working on and trying to get more, as a sort of common standard in the Parliament. I think I only answered half the question now, no?
No, I think it went pretty well.
Okay.
And I want to say thank you really much for everything.
Oh, that's it already? Oh.
Yes. Yeah. You were fantastic. You made the entire interview like really clear and really like easy for a young person like me to understand, like, and any other young people. And I feel like it's very important to have someone like you doing what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.